Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
The original Planet of the Apes is a sci-fi classic and spun out a long franchise long before franchises were a thing, and long even before Star Wars. The first film had 4 sequels, 2 TV shows, 1 live action, 1 animated, and it sold a lot, and I mean a lot, of merchandise. And again, remember, this was about 10 years pre-Star Wars, which in 1977 pretty much invented the whole movie toy industry as we know it at the moment. Because I think this film is very important, not only in terms of sci-fi films, but in terms of how franchises operate. Because this was sort of the first movie franchise, and franchises kind of operated this way up until the MCU in 2008. It was basically do exactly the same, but more on less money. And some franchises still operate that way in the horror genre, let's be honest. But I'm not going to talk about the sequels in this video or the recent Planet of the Apes reboot movies, but the original 1968 Planet of the Apes. But before we get to that, just to say thanks for taking the time to choose to watch this channel. I really appreciate it, and if you haven't done it already, hit subscribe, and if you make it all the way to the end of the video, leave a like as well. So, Planet of the Apes, 1968, just to remind you again, about 10 years before Star Wars changed the movie industry, so let's just get over that. This is a film that created a franchise that's still going today. The reboots have kind of had a weird, unexpected success, like the whole MonsterVerse with Godzilla and King Kong. They aren't comic book movies, but they still make enough money to get sequels, seemingly, and everyone seems to get better and better, and that's kind of true with the whole MonsterVerse franchise as well. But the original 60s version, let's talk about that. Famous for that ending, but where did it all start? Based on the novel by Frenchman Pierre Goulle, who also wrote Bridge Over the River Kwai, by the way, and made it into a movie with Hollywood producer Arthur P. Jacobs. And this is a pretty interesting guy and worth a Google. I mean, I'm not going to educate you on him here, you can take the time to do that yourself, but the man lived a life. Now, the book is quite different from the film, and the original script, written by Twilight Zone's own Rod Serling, kind of followed suit. The overall story to the finished film product was a little bit similar, but there were significant differences, mainly how advanced the ape civilizations were. They were living in apartments, they had flying machines and cars, and a judicial system more closely resembling our own. Nova would have also had a much bigger part, becoming pregnant by Taylor before the end of the film, and the apes realising that she could potentially give birth to more advanced humans later on. But all that was cut out of the final script, along with the apes being made less advanced, which was down to budget at the end of the day. But the very famous ending was kept, and I will get to that, but in the moment, just leave a like. There were more than 30 drafts of the script, and it was pitched to literally all the big studios in Hollywood with a firm no all round. Jacobs realised that he needed a big star, and now before they landed on Charlton Heston, it was rumoured that they wanted Marlon Brando or Paul Newman. But due to money, scheduling conflicts, or the actors just not liking the script, that never materialised. But once they did land Charlton Heston and had some studio interest, the problem that they soon realised is once they sold the idea to 20th Century Fox, how do you make the makeup look good? How do you make a human actor not only look like an ape, but how do you give that actor the ability to perform through heavy makeup and prosthetics? They did do an initial makeup test, which is pretty different to the final version, so let's take a look.
Man here is an animal. Man here was an animal. He had no civilization. He wore no clothes. He thought no thoughts. He spoke no language.
Just a few feet from this tent, you found a cemetery. Built and filled by a civilized race. A race which, according to you, never got beyond a crawl and a couple of grunts. You found more than a cemetery, Doctor. You found a question. Which came first, the chicken or the egg, the ape or the man?
Dr. Zayas, you'd better take a look at this. We found it in some kind of artificial shaft.
Look closely.
Cornelius in this was played by actor James Brolin, who's Josh Brolin's dad. Again, Google it, I'm not here to educate you. and a new makeup artist was brought in when they realised they needed prosthetics as opposed to just makeup. John Chambers, who had a history with making prosthetic limbs before he got into TV and film, was then recruited. And at this time, he was the go-to creature guy for Hollywood, doing every sci-fi movie and TV show pretty much. And to give you an idea of how big this guy was and how influential he is, he done Spock's ears. So, you know, he's that guy. But it wasn't just the initial 3 main ape characters that he had to cater for. There was an entire village of ape prosthetics needed. So if you do notice in some of the scenes in this film, particularly the crowd scenes, not every background actor is wearing prosthetics. Some are just wearing simple ape masks. And man, it is noticeable in a few scenes. But once they'd overcome that hurdle, they also decided to make 3 unique branches of the ape society look very different as well. Chimps, gorillas and orangutans all stand out with their own style, distinct way of talking, moving, acting, and of course performing from the actor themselves. Filmed in 1967, they only had 3 months to complete the shoot on a budget of just under $6 million, and $1 million of that was just on the makeup, by the way. The first scenes filmed were actually the ones where the astronauts landed on the planet marching across the desert, and for some reason they chose to film this in the summer, and it caused a few issues with cast and crew members fainting and collapsing on set. The Ape Village was also shot on land owned by Fox at the time, which was used for a ton of other films before it was sold and is now known as Malibu Park. But that's enough of the background stuff, let's get to the movie itself. It opens in deep space and we meet Commander Taylor on a mission, and by the time it takes him to get back home to Earth because he's so far away, every human being that he knows will be dead and long gone. He reflects on the meaning of his mission and what will become of humanity in his absence, and has it changed and evolved in that time. He goes into hypersleep and the credits then start over a score written by film and TV veteran Jerry Goldsmith. And man, Jerry Goldsmith has done everything. Again, if you don't know who he is, Google it. But even for Jerry Goldsmith, this is very different and very unique, and the score in this film really does stand out. After the credits roll, Taylor's ship crashes into water on a mysterious alien planet, with the only female crew member dying before the impact. The ship floods and they flee, not before he realises it's now the 38th century, at least in Earth time. So these 3 astronauts are stranded on an alien planet with no idea what star they're even looking up to in the sky, or even what part of space the ship was in when it crashed. For an introduction to Taylor, it really seems like he's not the first choice for a mission like this. He might look like the all-American guy, but he's definitely not happy about what was going on in America and the world before he left. Taylor butts heads with the other crew member, particularly Langdon, who picks up the vibe that Taylor is really throwing down about mankind and how futile everything is. And let's be honest, when I was rewatching this, I did think, man, I would not want to be stuck on an alien planet with Taylor either, because he's a real prick, and worse than that, he's a real cocky prick. But anyway, the first thing I noticed rewatching this, as I've already said, was the soundtrack by Jerry Goldsmith, which is absolutely amazing and worth a listen. But the other thing was, this film looks great. The locations, the cinematography, the special effects all stand up after almost 60 years. And I keep saying it, but this was made long before Star Wars. Before the concept of what is now sci-fi cinema even existed, the general public's mind was that sci-fi did look a bit cheap, a bit tacky and a bit camp, but man, did this film change all this. Because this film really caught the public's attention at the time. As I've said, it sold an absolute ton of merch and spun off a whole bunch of sequels. Now, another thought that I had was, if they decided to remake the original today, and they kind of already had 20 years ago with the Tim Burton Mark Wahlberg version, it would all be CGI. Because we get these long, sweeping, establishing shots of the astronauts in the desert, and this really adds to the feel of the movie in that these guys are on some strange alien planet. And the fact that this is all practical gives it a realness that most movies sadly lack these days as well. But let's get to the apes on the planet of the apes. What an intro with them rounding up humans that's been redone and spoofed more times than bullet time in The Matrix. Probably. I've not looked into that, don't quote me, but feel free to pass off that opinion as your own. And the ape makeup looks absolutely great. I can see why people freaked out and completely lost their mind over it at the time. The closest comparison I could think would be Thanos in the Infinity Saga, because we'd never seen a guy move like that and interact with characters and actors that way. And this must have been the sort of same difference at the time, because you've never seen makeup like this anywhere. Not in theatre, not in TV, and not on film. This was the first one to really do it. The sort of other closest follow-up would be any sort of vampire or Nosferatu or maybe Frankenstein movie, but my god, did this absolutely set the bar at the time, and it won a ton of awards, and quite rightly so. But although it's called Planet of the Apes, it's more a village at the end of the day. But with it all being practical, it looks amazing. All the sets, especially the village and inside of the village with the museum as well, particularly stands out during the scenes where Taylor is trying to escape. And once we get to the Planet of the Apes, or, you know, the village or whatever, they do take their time and show us a glimpse of how this ape society works. We know that there's a god, a government, a religion, a military. You get all that idea pretty quickly. It's not entirely the same, but it's not entirely different either. And then this talking man shows up, shakes up the fabric of the very society, revealing apes might not have always been the dominant species on this planet. Now, the three main ape actors, played by Kim Hunter as Zira, Maurice Evans as Dr. Zaius, and of course Roddy Mcdowell as Cornelius, are all iconic in their own way, especially Roddy Mcdowell, as he kept coming back to this franchise over the years. You can always tell who's who, and again, the performances that they're able to give through the makeup and the prosthetics completely changed the game at the time, and still pretty much continue to do so. I keep teasing the ending, which of course is iconic, but I think there's a strong argument that there's quite a few iconic scenes in this movie as well. The spoofs, the influences can be seen for the next 50 or 60 years in cinema, and oddly quite a lot in The Simpsons as well. Apart from all these great practical visuals like the makeup and the sets, the pace of this movie is absolutely fantastic. Even the slower scenes with Taylor in his cell, where he's literally talking to himself, don't slow the movie down. And it's all well done. It's not campy or over the top, which was a sci-fi trope a lot of movies and TV shows of that genre fell into at the time. Everything about this movie, the score, the sets, the makeup, the performances all stand out and make this what it is, a true sci-fi classic with one of the most iconic endings ever. When Taylor finally escapes after proving that there was an extinct advanced human society on the planet at one point, he finds out that he's been on Earth all along, just in the far-flung future, when he comes across the Statue of Liberty on the beach. And you've got to think again what it must have been like at that time seeing it in the cinema for the first time. And as I said at the start of the video, Apes launched a bunch of sequels, a mountain of merchandise, and a franchise that's still going strong to this day. And I think the reason that this is still going strong to this day is the just basic concept of humans becoming sort of lower down on evolution or the food chain is absolutely fascinating. The only other type of cinema or sci-fi that sort of has the same idea is the whole alien invasion thing, which is probably the oldest sci-fi trope, let's be honest, and we've seen it time and again from the original War of the Worlds up to Independence Day. But it's the fact that the apes don't conquer us, at least not in the initial first one. It seems to be us that conquer ourselves, and then in the reboot franchise that they're doing at the moment, it's evolution that conquers humanity. And I love the fact that they've adapted the idea that way. It is just absolutely fascinating about how you can sort of reinvent this idea of apes being in charge and tell the story of how they do rise to power and become the dominant species on the planet. Now, I suppose you better talk budgets and success and why they kept making these films. As I said, it was made for just under $6 million and had a total worldwide gross of $32 million, so a pretty huge success at the time, and as I keep saying, this is long before the sci-fi genre as we know it existed. In fact, I think there's a pretty strong argument that you could say that this film started the whole sci-fi genre about 10 years before Star Wars, but if you want to argue about that with me, comment below. If you're asking me, everyone's probably got their own favourite Planet of the Apes films, especially if you were alive at the time that they were in the cinema or they were getting put on TV. I seen them probably around the late 80s to the mid 90s, and I can't even remember what order I seen the films in. And I suppose, you know, it doesn't really matter because there's the first film, the sequel to that, then it goes into prequel territory. Don't even worry about it. We're not going to get into that. That's for another video. But what is interesting about these initial Planet of the Apes films is the first one came out in 1968 and the last one came out in 1973. And when you think about that and you look at these films, that is absolutely crazy that Hollywood was able to churn out films like this on a consistent basis so quickly. Because after they seen the final box office scores for the first one, they realised that they had a monster hit on their hands and they wanted to keep running with it. Which is kind of what happened with the new trilogy as well. No one really expected a new Planet of the Apes films in 2011, let alone the fact that it would be any good and spawn 2 superior sequels as well. Hey, just my point of view, what's your favourite of the new 3? Let me know in the comments below. But the fact that this is a franchise that's been operating for over 50 years and has spawned countless sequels, reboots, sequels, prequels, TV shows, etc., you get the idea, proves one thing, that Planet of the Apes is an absolutely profitable franchise if it's done right. And the second thing that it proves is people are interested in intellectual property or IP, not the actors or the movie stars playing the characters. And that's kind of like the MCU as well. There's a big debate as to whether the MCU does make movie stars. Because if you look at people like Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr., I know he won an Oscar, but before that, they don't really have mega hits on their hands the same way that they do when they're playing those characters within the Marvel franchise. And that was kind of the same for Roddy McDowell in Apes as well. Sure, he was already a successful and established actor, and he did do things before, after, in between and outside of the Apes, but that's what he's always going to be known as. And again, tying it back to the Monsterverse franchise with King Kong, Godzilla that we've had in the last few years as well, this does reinforce that people do like well done intellectual property and familiar characters, rather than the big names that are playing those characters. Because the Monsterverse has had some absolutely huge names as well. It's had Kurt Russell in the fucking TV show, for Christ's sake. But as good as he is and as good as his son was, you go there for the big lizard and the big monkey having the fight. I'm interested to hear what you guys think about this. Is it the overall IP that's successful, or do you prefer more character-driven story arcs? Because one of the things that the two Ape franchises have in common, the 60s one and the modern one, is they don't really carry over any of the human characters from any of the film. I mean, sure, Taylor and Nova are in the sequel, but they don't really do or contribute much. And the 3 most recent Ape films have done exactly the same thing as well, because it's the apes that are the star of this, regardless if it's the 60s, the noughties, or after that. For some reason, people keep coming back, loving this universe and looking for more stories that are set up and told well. And we're kind of lucky with the quality that we have had in the Apes franchise overall. When you look at more recent ones, like for example, the DCEU in the Fast and the Furious, which just seemed to spin out sequel after sequel that got bigger and badder. Whereas the Apes films at least got smaller, slightly better written, but cheaper. But again, that's just my opinion. I want to know what you guys think. Do you remember that ending the first time you seen it, and how did it make you feel? What's your favourite Planet of the Apes films from the classic ones, and what's your favourite ones from the new reboot as well? Let me know in the comments below, or you can reach out to me on Twitter at TheGeeksReviews. And if you've seen the new Planet of the Apes film, let me know what you think about that as well. If you've made it this far, as always, subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video. And my name's Al, thanks for watching.